So I have the distinguished record. You might not see this record in the Guinness book, but I think it belongs there, if I do say so myself. I have the distinguished record of, during my driver's ed time from 15 years old to 16 years old, I avoided the most accidents of any human ever. Amen. Give it up. That's right. That's right. I also almost created every single one of those accidents, but we don't need to talk about that part. I think you guys need to be a little happier. You need to be a little more optimistic. Stop looking at the downside, So I avoided lots and lots of accidents. But in that process of learning how to drive, I really did learn a lot of stuff on the rules of the road. But wouldn't you have it, even though I avoided a lot of accidents, I have been in 2 major collisions in my life. And I thought, I should tell people about them. Everybody's getting to know each other. Church just opened a few weeks ago. Why not? Well, so the first accident that I was in, I was 16 years old. I think we have pictures of some of the cars here, actually. I was in a blue station wagon. It looked a lot like that. I don't know if anybody recognizes ever driving a vehicle like that, but that thing was a tank, man. And so I was driving that blue station wagon into the city. My home church, my family lived about 20 minutes from the church. The church is inner city. And so I was driving in with all of my cousins and everybody packed in. Here I am, 16 years old, and I've got the entire next generation of my family in the vehicle. How safe was that? Mom was super smart to let me do that. But I was driving into the city, and what happened, out of the corner of my eye, I look over to my right, and what it was this was 395, I think, coming into downtown Baltimore. And out of my right, some sweet lady just decided that nothing really applied to her. So she pulled out of the gas station and just decided to cut straight across traffic. Now, we're all flying off of a highway, We're kind of decelerating coming off of a major highway. And this lady's just taking her sweet old time on a Sunday morning, just putting along. And I remember screaming out because I didn't have much time to react. I just saw this lady pulling in front of me, and I said, "Don't do it, don't do it." Boom. And we hit her T-bone. She went one direction, we went the other. We crashed up into the side of a building, and it was a big mess. Now, we went into oncoming traffic of people trying to get on that highway, but thanks God, there was no one coming in that direction at that moment. We kind of sneaked, through, and then plenty of cars had to go around us afterwards, and it was a big scene. But that was my first accident, and I'll have you know, that was not my fault. My second one, I was coming out of my university. We had a train track that ran the back side of campus, and at the time, now they have a tunnel. They're all fancy now, but back then you had to go over this train track over a hill, so you couldn't see really too much of what's on the other side. But they would have the guard come down, the whistles and everything would blow, the bells would ring, and you would go over and hit a bump or two, and then you'd be down a hill. And so I was next up, and I could see that there was space on the other side for me. And I start to hear ding, ding, ding. And I did what all of you would do. I said, I don't want to get stuck on this side of the train. So I went ahead and I went across the other side of the train track. Now, all of you are thinking, Tally, you got in an accident, didn't you? You crashed into somebody. No, I told you, I need you to think optimistically tonight. So I got to the other side just fine. There apparently was a young lady who was a senior at the college that decided she did not have time to wait for the train either. And it didn't matter that I was sitting on the other side of that train track. And so she gunned it, popped over that hill, landed in the back of my 1993 Geo Metro. Isn't that car a rocking car? Look at that thing, man. That picks up, listen, I picked up my wife with that. So the kids today call it Riz. You can call me King Rizzler. If you're driving that kind of car and you pick up a young lady like this. But so those are my 2 accidents. And I was thinking, what caused all that commotion in my life? What caused those accidents, all those near misses even that I was responsible for? What caused all of those things was a lack of boundaries. People weren't responding to the boundaries that were put in place. And here's the thing that we have to think about tonight that I want to give you permission with, even, is that healthy boundaries are a blessing to you and not a burden. Healthy boundaries are a blessing to you and not a burden. You see, I got in those accidents because someone else decided to violate boundaries. In our lives every single day, when we think about boundaries, we often kind of repel ourselves because we go, man, a boundary means it's something that I can't do. A boundary takes away freedom from me. A boundary slows me down or stops, and I don't really like boundaries. But let me ask you this. How many times do you feel overwhelmed in your life and other people decide to violate your boundaries? Anybody? You want to admit it? Are you sitting next to them? Right? Like we all have boundaries. We have personal space. We have times of day where you can call me. We have some people in this room, you can just walk up to their house and knock on the door and walk right in and they'll be fine. There's other people in this room, if you do that exact same thing, you'll be shot and carried away. Like that's just how it is. Different boundaries for different people. And so the thing is with boundaries is that boundaries allow us to function. And when boundaries are healthy in your life, they're a blessing to you, and they're a blessing to the people around you. Maybe you feel overcommitted, and you get stressed out because you say, man, I talk to so many people, and they go, well, Tally, I'm burnt out. And I'll say, well, what are you doing? Well, I'm doing this, and I'm going here, and I'm going that, and then there's that party I got to go to, and she expects me to do that, and I want to go here. And I say, well, can't you just not do some of that? Oh, no. They would hate me. It's a boundary. We're not putting up boundaries. Maybe there's not faith being practiced at home, and you haven't established in your house how you want that to operate. That's a boundary. Maybe the kids aren't being respectful. Maybe that when they were young, you gave them every single thing all the time, and then as they got older, they just kind of took advantage, and now you're like, man, what do I do now? And it's kind of like, well, it's going to take a lot of work to get back to the beginning. We got to establish boundaries. Boundaries are very helpful as long as they're healthy. Maybe there's no time in your marriage. Maybe if you're in a relationship and you just say, man, every time we look up, it just feels like another week went by and we didn't spend the time together necessary. Well, it means we have to establish some boundaries. Maybe there's in-laws that are acting more like outlaws. And it's time that we create some boundaries for how things are going to work in the new family. We all face the struggle of balancing love and limits within the family. We can all relate to that. There's always a struggle between love and limits because anytime you tell somebody, hey, you can't just show up at my house unannounced. I don't like that. I want to be prepared for you. I want to be mentally ready. I have other things going on. I can't have you just do that. It really upsets me, and I don't want to. I want to be at my best for you when you come. So I'm going to ask that you please just give me a call, give me a text, ask if it's okay to swing by. That's a boundary. No, I'm not going to talk with you about my finances or where I went on that trip or what I was doing last night at 12 because I'm a grown adult and I really don't have to do that. It's a boundary. Hey, I'd really appreciate if I didn't have to hear what you thought of me from someone else because you chose to gossip instead of just come and ask me a question directly. It's a boundary. But do you see how each one, there's always this delicate balance of, I love you, but I have to draw a line. The love and the limits are always in tension, but I promise you that a healthy boundary leads to a healthy life and a healthy relationship. Once the dust settles and everybody calms back down, you'll have a better, healthier relationship. Here's the key passage tonight. We're going to, like I said, branch off to several others. But here's the key passage tonight that we have to think about when we're thinking about boundaries. Proverbs 25:28 says this, a man without self-control, everybody say self-control. That wasn't everybody. Everybody say self-control. This side's winning. A man without self-control is like a city broken in and left without walls. A man or a woman, a person without self-control, is if a city had been broken into and the walls had been knocked down. What good would a city be, especially in biblical times, if there was no wall at all? Well, the fact is, we know from the story of Nehemiah, and we'll reference it later, we know from the story of Nehemiah, the moment that walls are down in a city, there is no city. Nothing safe can happen inside. You cannot have trade. You cannot have a church. You will be plundered at every chance. You can't build strong families. Like the moment that the walls are down, you do not have peace inside anymore. And God desires for you to have peace in your life. That is a desire. He is the Prince of Peace. It's what he does when he comes and he lives a perfect life, dies on the cross, is resurrected, and invites you into relationship with him. He becomes your peace. God desires for you to live at peace. John 10:10 says he actually desires for you to have an abundant life, a life better than you could plan for yourself. God wants for you. But how can I have a life of peace? How can I have an abundant existence where God is for me and God loves me and where I can help God in his work to change the world and make the world feel more like heaven? How can I do all of that if my own city is in ruins? And I don't have boundaries. I don't have walls. But we're taught, sometimes those of you that have been in church for a while, you haven't really been taught the idea of boundary because you've been taught the goal of a Christian is to be nice. And so we're like, well, that doesn't sound nice if I tell somebody that they have to call before they can come by. It doesn't sound nice if I say, I'd rather you not gossip about me. It doesn't sound nice if I say, no, we're not going to talk about my checking account. That sound nice. But niceness leads to no boundaries. And with no boundaries, you don't have peace anymore. And what a boundary is, it's a demonstration of self-control, both on your side and for the person that needs to hear about your boundary. And so for you, you've got to have enough control of that circle that's right around your life, that what goes on inside there, you have the rules and the reins over it. Remember in Genesis, we were told like, hey, I'm going to give you this earth and I want you to take dominion. And yet today, so many people can't even draw a circle around their feet and have dominion over what's in that circle. God desires for us to be able to have healthy boundaries so that we can have peace. And the stronger of a leader you are, the stronger of a man, the stronger of a woman you are, that circle gets larger. And that circle goes around your children, its circle goes around your extended family, it goes around your community, it goes around your church, and you and I become more and more responsible for more things. And the greater a man of God is, the greater he will be responsible for more and more people. He will care about others. He will use his life and leverage his life for the benefit of other people. That's a true meaning of a man. It's not how many beers I can throw down and how many women I can be with. It is how many people are blessed because of my presence. It's always sad for me when I do a service of somebody that passes, and I can't tell you how many times the biggest thing people would say about the person's life is which sports team they loved. And that's great. We all love teams. But I want to be at the end of my life, and I pray that you do too, to where people talk about the influence that I had and the way that I helped and the burden that I helped lift off of them. But we can't do that if our own house is in ruins because we didn't have boundaries. We didn't have self-control. Let me show you some examples where God put boundaries in place in different ways. And I'll show you the benefits of these particular boundaries because I want you first to understand, okay, boundaries can be good. Then I want to give you permission to say, okay, I'm going to own some new boundaries in my life because I'm going to go after that peace that God has for me. I'm not going to let life happen to me. I'm going to happen to life. And so here's a few. The Garden of Eden in Genesis 2. In the Garden of Eden, there was a command not to eat from the tree, and it was to protect Adam and Eve from spiritual death and separation from him. So the Garden of Eden, the boundary was the blessing of protection. There are some boundaries that you should have in your life so that you have protection. There are some boundaries God has put into your life so that you are protected. The 10 Commandments in Exodus 20, that was a blessing of guidance. That boundary of, hey, do these things, be about this stuff, don't be about all that stuff, be about this stuff. That was the blessing of guidance. God saying, hey, color within these lines and you're going to have a great existence. Nehemiah, that we just referenced a little while ago, and the wall of Jerusalem, when he was rebuilding the wall, this was a blessing of security. It not only provided physical security and a sense of community, but it provided identity, protecting the people from their enemies. The blessing of security. There are some boundaries that are there for your security. Jesus' personal boundaries. Did you know that Jesus had boundaries? Jesus himself told people no. Jesus himself broke away from his brothers. Jesus' personal boundaries in Mark 1:35, Jesus set boundaries to maintain his relationship with the Father. It says that he broke away and he went away and he prayed. At different times, he told people, don't even tell people that I'm the Messiah. Don't even tell people that you saw me today. He created a sense of boundary so that he could do the work that God called him to. Paul's instructions on church discipline in 1 Corinthians 5. The Corinthian church had a lot of jacked up people. And you think a church that in your memory is bad? Go read the book of Corinthians. They were jacked up to the nines. But Paul's instructions to them were about some church discipline stuff. Well, what was he after? He was trying to bless them with purity and integrity. Purity and integrity. So all along Scripture, you can see God puts boundaries into place for the blessing and the benefit of his people. So I want to talk to you tonight about 3 areas where you and your family should consider some healthy boundaries. The first area I want to talk to you about is the self, yourself. Healthy boundaries are vital for self-respect, integrity, and healthy relationships. If I'm going to have healthy boundaries in my own life, I've got to understand that it is for my own self-respect. There's got to be some things that I just don't take from people because I go, no, I love me. Not in an arrogant way, not in a better than you way. It's in a way that Jesus died for me way. And I kind of like me, and I don't like being stomped on, and I don't believe you should walk on me. And so as a result, for some self-respect, I'm going to create a boundary between us. Maybe you've been disrespectful. Maybe you stole from me. Maybe that you've been very hurtful. And yes, I forgive you, but I'm not going to walk that road. I've got to create some distance here. Self-respect, integrity. Sometimes we need boundaries in our life. It's not because of anybody outside. Sometimes I need them for me. Because I know if I don't do this, if I don't wake up at this hour, if I don't eat this type of food, if I don't go to this type of place, then I know that they have consequences. And so for me to be able to have integrity, I've got to be able to have some boundaries that I've created. And then healthy relationships I've already hit on. We've got to be able to look at our friends and loved ones and just go, hey, this is kind of a boundary for me. Like we got to talk this through because this isn't working. We got to do something that makes this work. Boundaries are like the walls of that city. They protect us. Dr. Henry Cloud wrote a book called Boundaries, by the way. If you want to see where a decent amount of some of the references and quotes from tonight, there's a fantastic book on this. I've talked to so many people that at the end of the day, what they really needed were boundaries in their life. And this would be a book that I recommend that they walk through. But it's called Boundaries, literally. It's all it is. By Cloud and Townsend. Henry Cloud says this: boundaries define us. They define what is me and what is not me. A boundary show where I end and someone else begins. You see, when someone believes that they have access to you and they can tell you how you're going to live your life and they can get involved, and maybe they're a family member, maybe they're an aunt and uncle, and they start to do that to you, and they don't have a tie, they don't have any kind of reason to stay engaged, they just want to spout off at the mouth. When people are doing that, they're blending in them and you. And by creating a boundary, you're taking back your identity. You're saying, hold on here. No, I understand that you see it that way, and I understand that I see it this way. But the boundary that I have to draw allows me to be me and you to be you. And if we respect and love each other enough, we're going to find a way to get along, you being you and me being me. The boundaries of self-discipline are important on both sides of every relationship. You see, when people make healthy boundaries and the ask is not over the top, the ask is not sinful, the ask is not greedy, the ask is simply, I have my identity. When people do that, we need to have some self-restraint and self-respect to appreciate the boundary that's been drawn for us. And the more that you love the person, you'll give them that boundary. Proverbs 4:23 says this, keep your heart with all diligence, meaning watch your heart, for from it flows the springs of life. We've got to protect our hearts. We got to create boundaries for our hearts. If you're single, if you're in a dating relationship, you've got to protect your heart in that relationship. Until you are married, until the two have become one, it's a responsibility for you that you have boundaries. Psalm 147 says, he makes peace in your borders. He fills you with the finest of wheat. Nehemiah 4 says, so in the lowest parts of the space behind the wall and open places, I stationed people by their clans, with their swords and their spears and their bows. Healthy boundaries are vital, whether it's in the personal life in your own heart, whether it's between other people, or whether it's for a city. Boundaries are vital. You see, when you're thinking about yourself, integrity comes when you honor the boundaries that you set for yourself. Integrity comes into your life when you're living up to the standards that you have set for yourself. If you say that you're going to wake up at a certain time, you wake up at a certain time. If you say that you're going to be at the gym, you're going to be at the gym. Like when you start to do that enough and you start to win on your sheet with yourself enough, integrity builds. You begin to say, okay, I can handle this. I can do this. I can do hard things. But you've got to build up small if you have to, but you've got to build it up in order to have integrity. Otherwise, you kind of go through the world just waffling around and everybody else speaks into your life about how your life's going to be. But you've got to develop some wins to get that integrity strong. An example for me was I ran around with a really rough crowd growing up. And we were in inner city Baltimore, and everybody that I hung out with was 4 or 5 years older than me. And I realized at one point, as I was starting to get older, and I realized where my friends were going in life, I said, man, I can't be hanging around these guys anymore late into the night. And so a boundary that I had to draw was not that I'm dumping my friends, but I had to have a boundary over when I would be around them. I had to have a boundary that for me, what I did was I would play basketball all day, I'd play baseball, I'd hang out at the park, I'd do all this stuff. But for me, I started to selectively decide when the sun started to go down, I was going to make up an excuse I couldn't be hanging out anymore. And unfortunately, my mom, she got blamed for a lot. But I made a boundary because I had to have integrity with myself. I didn't want to run down the wrong road. Looking for a college, by the time I got to 17, 18, I'm looking at colleges. I intentionally didn't put any state schools down because I knew I was not ready and I knew who I was in my heart at that point. And I said, God, if I'm going to honor you, I've got to get in an environment that's going to help me swim in the right direction. And so when I filled out my FAFSA, I only put Christian schools. I showed up at the school without any idea of what their rules were. I literally had to go to Goodwill and buy suit pants and ties so that I could go to this particular school. because I didn't have a clue. I also had a television in my car, but we weren't allowed to have TVs at this particular school at the time. So I had to give away my TV. I had goatees. Believe it or not, they cared at that point about whether or not you had facial hair as an 18-year-old. And so I had to shave. But I did all of that because I said, the environment that is here is worth it for me. I need this right now. And for me, guys, about a month and a half later, my grandfather passed away. And I had a flood of people coming in and at 2 a.m, dropping money at my feet saying, Tally, here's gas money. Tally, here's money for a suit for your pop's funeral. And I realized I made the right decision. Creating a boundary for yourself allows you to have integrity with your life and become the man or the woman that you've decided that you're ready to be. A lot of us aren't where we want to be because we're not allowing ourselves to create the boundaries in our life so that we can get where we want to get to. Healthy boundaries create healthy confidence. Healthy boundaries create healthy confidence. So within yourself, healthy boundaries are important. But how about in relationships? Healthy boundaries in relationships fan the flame for love and respect in a marriage. It's a reality, a sad reality, but it's completely true, that a healthy, sustaining relationship, it has to reinvent itself every 6, 7, 8 years because the people involved in that relationship are changing every 6, 8, 10 years. And so when you meet somebody that's been in a long relationship, and they get bare bones honest with you, they'll tell you, he's not the same, and I'm not the same. But we made a commitment. And so we're here because we had to relearn each other and respect the fact that we wanted different things at different times and different seasons. And so a good, healthy, long-term relationship is really a continual dialogue about redefining boundaries within that relationship. What are our goals? What do we want to do? Do we want to have children? How many children? Where would we like to go? Where do you want a vacation? What about Thanksgiving? What about Christmas? All of these are boundary-defining conversations. And guess what? It's not stagnant forever. A great relationship redefines these things to make sure you're both on the same page and make sure you both have the joy and the freedom in that relationship. John Towson, in the same book, he said, in marriage, boundaries are a way to love your spouse better by giving them a clear understanding of your needs and your limits. Ephesians 5 says, however, let each one of you love his wife as himself, and let the wife see that she respects her husband. A great relationship is love and respect. You can't have love and respect unless you have clear boundaries between two people. This is how I'd like to be treated and addressed. This is how you'd like to be treated and addressed. Let's find that place where we can overlap. Likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor to women as the weaker vessel, since they are heirs with you in God's grace of life, so that your prayers may not be hindered. Literally, God's picture there is, hey, men, don't domineer using your brute force over a lady. And in fact, treat her so well because your prayers are dependent on how you treat that woman. God looks down and says, men, if you want your prayers to get through to my ears, you better be treating the women in your life with respect. What is that, guys? That's a boundary. That's a boundary that God set. And ladies, you should love that passage, I would think, because it's like, hold on. Yeah, that's a boundary my daddy set for our relationship. 1 Peter 3, likewise, husbands, live with your wives in an understanding way, showing honor. I just did that one. Song of Solomon 2:15, catch all the foxes for us, the little foxes that spoil the vineyards, and the vineyards of the blossom. It's talking about a relationship, catch all those things that destroy the relationship. Create boundaries, put up fences, create gates. Here's a couple of tools that you can use to create boundaries in a healthy marriage. Grab your Bible. That's a good place to start. Look at your calendar. Ask each other, how are we doing with our calendar? Are we overcommitted, overextended? Are we not doing anything? Well, how's our calendar doing? How about our checkbook? Where are we spending money? Do we like that? Is that something that we want to keep going? How about a life map? Sit down and just say, hey, let's talk. Like, let's start from when we were, born, our first memories, and let's kind of walk through life and see what got us here. And then let's say, hey, how do we want to finish the rest of this race together? What would we like to do? These are ways that you can create new boundaries going forward because you're going to create new goals together. Personality tools, figure out who each other are. See a counselor. You and I, we all have trauma. We all have different triggers that bother us. Some of us might need to go ahead and get down and sit down with a counselor. We have a great one in-house here. Vision board for your preferred future. Sit down and just say, man, what's the future look like for us? So let me ask you to do this. Evaluate the boundaries that are in your home. Do you have peace in your home? Do you have peace in your home right now? Like when you go home, is that the place you run to because you're like, man, that's my solace? And I don't mean peace like I get to the house and as long as I'm away from her. I'm talking about like your house is a way that you would like to be. It's your refuge. Unexpected visitors, clutter, yelling around, all these things can rob us of our peace. We might need to create some new boundaries. I mentioned earlier, in-laws cannot behave like outlaws. If you're in a marriage, if you're in a relationship where you constantly have a third party that's putting their nose in, and you have one party or the other in the relationship that's allowing that to happen, I want to beg you as your pastor, if you give me that opportunity in your life, I want to beg you to get that stopped. Like the Bible says that the two shall become one. Not the two who get married will become 3, 4, 5, 6. No, the two become one new relationship. And guess what? That new relationship might not do it the way mom and dad did. And we need to be able to draw that circle and say, Mom, Dad, we love you, but you're not invited into this particular circle. Money and intimacy. These are two other areas in a relationship that can make the thing soar or crash. Take time to define some boundaries. I want to end tonight talking about children. Healthy boundaries give children clarity, safety, and freedom to be a child. If you create good boundaries. One thing that stuck for Christy and I, we're incredibly proud of these two, but one thing that stuck for us was through college, I learned in developmental psychology that essentially there's an illustration of fleas, bouncing fleas that were put in a jar, and the fleas would jump, and once they would hit the top of that jar, eventually they stopped jumping as high. Then the scientists could take the top off the jar, the lid off the jar, and the fleas wouldn't jump out. And the lesson is that in developmental psychology, when a child is very, very small, that's when you want to have the strong boundaries. Because as they grow, you want to be able to release the boundaries and still have a child that has respect and value and love and nurturing. But early on, to do that right, you've got to when they're young. And I remember with ours, our daughter Ainsley, she had a phase there when she was coming up on her 2s, and she would just decide she's going to have a meltdown. And our method was, we're not going to do that. Like, we're going to sit together, and I'm going to hold you. And there was a few times, I promise, Christy thought I was an absolute nutcase. I wasn't yelling at my kid. I'm going to hold her. And eventually, and after a few of those instances, suddenly my daughter realized, like, hold on, me losing my stuff in the middle of a store is not going to get candy in the cart. It's just going to have me holding on to Dad for a half an hour. And so guess what stopped? We're not doing that. But you have to do that when a child is young so that you back off and give them complete freedom as they grow because they've demonstrated that they've earned it and they get it. I don't need to go wild to get what I want. I've got to work within the structure of the family. So I want to encourage you, use boundaries. Proverbs 22:6, train up a child in the way he should go. When he's old, he won't depart from it. Hebrews 12:11, for the moment, all discipline seems painful rather than pleasant, but later it yields the peaceful fruit of righteousness to those who have been trained by it. Colossians 3:20, children, obey your parents in everything, for this pleases the Lord. Boundaries provide children with a framework for making responsible choices. When mom and dad say, this is the circle you're allowed to play, or these are the borders. When mom and dad do that, it gives the child a sense of peace that says, okay, that's the boundaries. I can run around in here. And it allows the kid to just be a kid. They're not constantly at battle with you. They're not constantly at war. They're not embarrassing you. You don't feel bad about having people over because you've been able to say, hey, this is the boundary here. And as long as you're within that, you can have rule and reign. You can run around. But we're not going to do these particular things. I want to encourage you to develop good, healthy boundaries with your children. Tips for making boundaries with your children. The first one is this. Make some biblical ones. That's always a good idea. Boundaries should be age appropriate, meaning that as the children get older, there's less and less restriction. You could talk to our kids and ask them what we did, but essentially when they were young, heavy restriction. Middle years, 8, 10, 12, lot less. And then kind of like teenage, it's like, hey, we're getting ready to boot you out of this house. You better get ready, Like that's kind of how it went. The other thing about boundaries is, guess what? Life is not fair. Your children need to learn that. And so boundaries can adjust with the behavior of the child, meaning child A and child B, they might have to have some different boundaries sometimes. And guess what? You might have to tell them, this is exactly why. I can trust child A. I cannot trust you. And when I learn to trust you, because you demonstrate it, you're going to get the same boundaries as child A. Also, focus on the why and the what. So most parents will focus on the what with their kids. They're going to be like, you can't do that. Don't do that. Don't go there. Take time and explain the why. Don't let the child have to constantly beg you and why. Sit down and say, this is the rule that was violated. This is how this rule could hurt you. Therefore, mom, dad have to set up a boundary for you. So let's go back to our key passage. A man without self-control is like a city broken into and left without walls. Do you have healthy boundaries? What areas of life should you revisit and maybe consider creating some boundaries? And are you ready for your own life? Whether you're a single person, whether you're married with kids, whether you're single with kids, are you ready to make a plan? What's on the other side of you making a plan and drawing a circle around your life and taking some ownership is peace. And the people who can handle you making a boundary are the people that you want to keep in your life. The people that want to lose it because you decided to speak up for who you are, they really weren't with you anyway. They're with you so long as they can control you. And so you've got to get to the place to where you go, you know what? For me to have peace, I've got to trust that God has an identity that he's built around me. And between he and I, we can draw some circles. We can make some boundaries. But I know what won't work. What won't work is if we just let the walls crumble. Because the foxes get in and mess it up, the enemies get in and mess it up, and there is no more peace. And that doesn't match with the God who says, I want to give you an abundant life, a life greater than you could ask, hope, think, dream, or imagine. Without boundaries, it's not possible. But with them, you can see God do great things in your life.